Jim Rickards, Senior Managing Director at Tangent Capital Partners and author of Currency Wars, The Making of the Next Global Crisis, which does hit bookstores today. So first of all, Jim, congratulations.
Thank you, Deidre.
There's the book. It is a great read.
We support local produce.
Oh, wow. Wow. All right, we have actually three copies at this table, which is pretty cool. And it brought me back to the 80s, you know, war games. We were talking about Matthew Broderick. We have a clip for you later. It's not Dr. Strangelove.
I kind of date myself when I talk about Dr. Strangelove.
Okay,
but
so
that
we'll
was,
just
I grew up in the Cold War,
War
but War Games is a more recent film.
Before the break, we were talking about farmlands and about gold. Jim Grant said the magic word gold, and I know you both have some very specific ideas. Is it worth it going back to the gold standard, Jim Grant?
Yes, yeah. But this is, Jim treats this so well in his book that I think we should hear from him. Jim, you said in your concluding chapter, you said that because the academics will have no part of it, they scorn the idea, that therefore it is an improbable idea. It seems to me that this idea deserves the light of day, it deserves the ventilation of intelligent discussion. And you know, the goal, I mean, I take it as a postulate of our lives that whereas material progress is cumulative, financial progress is cyclical.
Right.
And when we say you can't go back, well, wait, you can go back, as you say so well, to a simpler and more efficacious system. The system we have now, in its complexity, is doomed, no?
Well, one of the criticisms I hear is, Jim, don't you want to make us go backwards? My answer is, if you're about to drive over the cliff, going backwards is not a bad thing to do.
That little reverse is important. But you said as well in your book, you just reminded us that Ben Bernanke himself is actually somewhat against this idea because he's, of course, a student of the Great Depression and points out that economies that have been in depression come out of depression much more slowly, right, if they have this link to gold.
Well, that's true. Ben Bernanke is not only a scholar of the Great Depression, he actually wrote a paper in the 90s on the gold standard, the problems with the gold standard. The economists to this day, one of the reasons they disparage gold is because of the gold exchange standard of the late 1920s, early 1930s. That actually was flawed. It was flawed because, not because of gold, but because they got the price wrong. In other words, they went back to the pre-World War I price, but taking into account all the money that had been printed to fight World War I, if you went back to the pre-World War I price, that was massively deflationary. It probably did contribute to the Great Depression. So that's a fair criticism. But the criticism is not gold, it was the price. If they'd gone to $50 an ounce, we might have avoided the Great Depression.
And Deirdre, if, everyone harks back to the Great Depression as the one and only historical event of the 20th century.
Right, that's our marker, right? But there's more.
But they say you can't get out of a depression without putting immense amount of money. In the Depression of 1920-21, after the First World War, hugely severe, 14% down in industrial production or something, real GDP down close to 10%, 12% unemployment, commodity prices down something like 40% top to bottom. It lasted for 18 months and it gave rise to the proverbially roaring 20s. Public policy in that depression consisted of two things: running a budget surplus and the Fed tightening and raising interest rates. So, Paul Krugman, tell us, why did the Depression ever end? Right?
Can we phone a friend? We'll phone Paul and ask.
Right, and Jim's exactly right. And I made that point. I've said, you know, actually interest rates should have been raised in 2009, and these banks should have been allowed to fail. And people say, oh my goodness, wouldn't that have meant, you know, massive unemployment in 2009? My answer is yes, but we'd be growing today. In other words, what we've got, you know, policymakers, Janet Yellen, Ben Bernanke, one after the other, say we don't want to repeat the mistakes of Japan, but they're making every single mistake. They're doing exactly what Japan did. Why are we surprised that we don't have any growth?
So you think, without a doubt, we're headed for a lost decade?
If that would be my best case, a lost decade, and the worst case would be far worse than that. Because my problem with the Fed is they think they're playing with a thermostat. You know, they can dial the money supply up. If it gets too hot, dial it down a little bit. It's not a thermostat. It's a nuclear reactor where you have fuel rods and control rods. You can dial it up and down, but if you get it wrong, you have a catastrophe. Not just the house is a little too hot, the whole thing melts down.
Right, this is the problem of the Fed morphing, without issuing a press release to tell us all, but going from central banking to central planning.
Right.
And this is the problem, I think, with central banks the world over. They are in the business of imposing prosperity through financial means rather than treating prosperity as a co-product of actual growth.
What about people who say, what are their choices, though? That's always the counter-argument that I hear. What are their choices given the times we're in?
The threshold job of these people is to listen, is to listen to, and read Jim's book, and to listen to the arguments that what they are doing is not just technically maladroit, but fundamentally misplaced. Their intentions are the best in the world, but what they're doing is incalculable harm. By the way, I don't think we're not Japan. Japan has a kind of a national or a hugely problematic view towards failure. Japan will not admit it, won't reprice it, won't move on to the next thing. America has that capacity, but just as you say, that capacity is being bleached out of us through public policy.
Well, Jim's right. We showed the capacity in 1990, 1991. We had a decade of the S&L crisis, and then the RTC came in. I was down the RTC doing deals before they had furniture. It was a new agency. We went in. They were operating out of boxes, and we were buying loans from the government. They put all the junk. They closed the institutions. They put the junk in the RTC. They sold it to Wall Street and got it done in 2 years. This is just going to drag on for 10 years.
Okay, it's not global thermonuclear war we're talking about is global currency wars, just as damaging, though. Jim Rickards of Tangent Capital Partners wrote a book about it. It's out today. So he writes about taking part in a Pentagon war game focused on this intersection of, well, finance and military strength, or finance and defense. Jim Grant of Grant's Interest Rate Observer here with us as well. And at the heart of a lot of this book, Jim, is the discussion about gold, which we were having earlier. What is the right price for gold?
Well, Deidre, considering that smart people like Winston Churchill got it wrong in the 1920s, I think humility is called for. My approach is not so much to name a price, but to get the questions right. If you get the questions right, you can work towards a price. So what are the questions? Every gold standard is some relationship between paper money and gold. And so the first question you have to answer is, what is your definition of money? Are you going to use M0, which is base money, M1, which includes checking accounts, or M2, which includes money market funds? So you've got to answer that. The second question you have to answer is very important. What percentage gold backing do you want? Now, the hard shell gold bugs, Murray Rothbard would say you need 100% because you can't trust the government. But England ran a very successful gold standard in the 19th century with 20% backing, and historically the United States was around 40%. Interestingly, we're 17% today. The market value of gold is 17% of M1, so I think the U.S. has never really gone off the gold standard. We have a kind of shadow gold standard, so you have to get that right. The third thing is, who's in the club? Does the U.S. do this unilaterally, in which case you get one set of ratios? I think it's more likely to do it globally. If only the U.S. did it, that would be the only money that anybody would want. And so, but the problem is when you throw in everyone else, particularly China, you dilute the ratio because they have they have 4 times our M1, but only 1/8 our gold. So there's a 32 dilution factor if you put them in the group. And then the final thing you have to, so when you do all that, you get a range. And actually, this is all in the book. I've calculated all these ratios. At the low end of the range, you get about $3,000 an ounce, which is not far from where Jim and Lou Laram and others have been. At the high end, if you include the U.S., ECB, and China, using M2 with 100% backing, which I don't recommend, but if you did that, it's $44,000 an ounce.
That's good.
Yeah, that
sounds about right. That was the number you're going to say?
So just to be clear, I'm not predicting $44,000 gold. What I'm saying is this is 8th grade math. These are not pie in the sky numbers.
But for the present day investor, I mean, the truth of it is that gold yields just as much today, down $37, as it did yesterday. The PE is the same. There's no conference call today as there was. So gold is a kind of poetry, but I think more tangibly and perhaps more meaningfully, I value it as kind of conceptually as 1 divided by N, where N equals the world's faith in the judgment and the wisdom of people like Ben Bernanke. So it's 1 over faith. And insofar as faith dwindles, which I think it should because of the nature of the complex system that Jim describes so well in his book, as that faith dwindles, the price will rise. And I think as the world turns away from the regime of the past 40 years and towards a truly elegant and simple system that prevailed not so long ago, that the gold will settle into a much higher price, I think. But as Jim said, and we should emphasize, one is humble before this non-yielding asset.
And it's idea. We're talking about an idea. We're not talking about the actual price that gold will hit on the market. But I mean, in the book, the simulation was really interesting. What if Russia, I'm just picking a random country, decides they don't want to basically do business in dollars anymore, right? And they create a currency, put all the gold, you can deposit in Switzerland. There's a bank in London.
In London, right.
And you just issue a currency, and then that's what they choose to export in.
Well, this was a gambit in the war game. game, and I was on the China team, but I had a good friend on the Russia team, and we said, well, let's give the Pentagon their money's worth. It was, for the viewers, this was the first ever financial war game conducted by the Pentagon. We did it at the Warfare Analysis Laboratory inside a applied physics laboratory, top secret weapons laboratory. They had done many, many war games over the decades. This was the first financial war. You couldn't shoot or explode anything. It had to be commodities, currencies, stocks and bonds. And I played on the China team. When I got back, I said to my wife, I have good news and bad news. The good news is my team won. The bad news is I played China. But but that's right. We actually came up with a gold-backed currency using Swiss and London fiduciaries, because we knew nobody would trust the Russians. But you could deposit your gold in Switzerland. You could get a certificate from a London bank. That would be money good. And then from then on, if the U.S. wanted, or Europe wanted, natural resource exports from Russia or manufactured goods from China, you had to pay in this new currency and then see how the U.S. reacted.
Well, it is a very good read, and I thank you both so much for coming in. It's been a pleasure to see you both, Jim Rickards.
Congratulations.
Thank you, and Sleeping at 11, Jim Grant. Thank you very much.